I don't believe that the perennial problems of cross-cultural reporting have gone away. When I first heard I would speak to this conference on the Middle East and the media, I went back to a book I hadn't opened in years. It sat with yellowing pages on a distant bookshelf. Edward Said, the great Palestinian theorist of Orientalism, wrote Covering Islam in 1981 after the revolution in Iran. A quick browse through the book shows that it was remarkably prescient. Some things have not changed much. Take the last sentences of his book. If the history of knowledge about Islam in the West has been too closely tied to conquest and domination, the time has come for those ties to be severed completely. About this, one cannot be too emphatic. For otherwise, we will not only face protracted tension and perhaps even war, but we will offer the Muslim world the prospect of many wars, unimaginable suffering, and disastrous upheavals, not the least of which would be the birth of an Islam fully ready to play the role prepared for it by reaction, orthodoxy, and desperation. By even the most sanguine of standards, this is not a pleasant possibility. That was 1981. Said's prediction has been more or less fulfilled. His diagnosis of the role of knowledge is strongly stated, of course, as you would expect. And it's hard to assess how much the Western media have in fact contributed to those disastrous upheavals he predicted. But it's no secret that many people accuse those media of negligence or complicity. We only have to examine the performance of those media in 2002 and 2003, when venerable media names advertently or inadvertently helped Western governments prepare public opinion for the venture of invading Iraq. There have been postmortems and some introspection, but nothing dramatic has changed to stop that happening again. It's hard to exaggerate the role of the media in shaping perceptions of faraway places, especially areas of conflict such as the Middle East. Consider how people living in the United States or Europe might acquire knowledge of the Arab world. Unless they have a special interest in the subject, they pick up images and scraps of information from school, from films, perhaps from chance references in novels, occasionally but rarely from personal contact with Arab immigrants, but lastly and most intensively from what they see on television and read in newspapers and magazines. Coverage of the Middle East is often sparse and sporadic in widely circulated Western media, and often it takes the form of domestic news with an international dimension. In Britain last summer, for example, for weeks on end, domestic television coverage of the conflict in Afghanistan was mostly about British soldiers, with tributes to the dead and visits to their homes. When there was coverage of the conflict on the ground, it was usually military analysts discussing the various options open to NATO forces. During the invasion of Iraq, I recall watching day after day of CNN and Fox News coverage and wondering where the Iraqis had gone. Precious few Iraqis appeared on the screen except as dots in the distance. Reporters raced through the desert in armored vehicles, stepping out from time to time to tell their audiences how we were doing against them. Media and authority had coalesced. The extent and the quality of media coverage does matter. It feeds directly into public policies which can spell life or death. An uninformed or misinformed public can go along with policies detrimental to their own interests and the interests of countless millions of others. A well-informed public, on the other hand, can act as a brake on government. So what are the specific flaws in the way the medias of the West and of the Arab and Muslim worlds cover the other? At the top of the list must come essentialism, a natural impulse for outsiders trying to describe another society or civilization. Essentialists believe there is some tangible and immutable essence to Islam or Christianity, to any society or culture. It is the bane of good reporting. Journalism has fallen behind the academic world in this respect. Anthropologists and political scientists contest interpretations based on cultural or ideological determinism. But journalists still have no problem suggesting the Middle East is historically prone to conflict, that Arab society is frozen in ancient family or tribal models, or that Muslims are in some sense hostile to modernity, however modernity might be construed. Essentialism is a form of stereotyping. It provides ready answers, neat summations, apparently useful insights for the audience back home. But it blinds the reporter to the possibilities of internal change, of constructive interaction with the outside world. It makes unwarranted assumptions about the level of conformity among Arabs or Muslims or anyone else. It judges individuals on how far they conform or diverge from some spurious Platonic ideal of Arabness or Muslimness or Westernization. I believe those essences are myths, and we should all abandon the search for them. The alternative is messy and arduous. Journalists have to sift through a mass of data about the real world, asking individual people how they see the world, what their aspirations are, and what are their grievances. But that is what working journalists often do well. Another fraught area for journalism, especially in recent times, has been embedding in the widest sense. The way journalists have become dependent for their physical safety on the armed forces and governments of their own nation states. When I started covering the Middle East, we were free to speak to all sides in a conflict. We were people at least disengaged, if not always impartial, and we could visit front lines and sometimes cross those lines to the other side with few restrictions. That began to change when the United States intervened in the Lebanese conflict and reporters became targets for kidnappers. Now the change has gone even further. European and American governments, by alienating so many Arabs and Muslims, have inadvertently compromised all their own citizens, forcing them to seek military protection in many areas. George Bush's famous adage, "You are either with us or against us," has come home to roost. The loss for journalism has been tragic. As Western armies take on a silent and mysterious, almost amorphous enemy, the camp followers who are journalists have lost the chance to tell the other side of the story.